start that. And here we are again for another meeting of our Kubernetes SIG CMS. SIG CMS over SIG Drupal, specifically because we're looking at addressing a broader range of CMS patterns that allow people to host a multitude of CMSs on Kubernetes. I think that that's a developing space, and there's a lot of very active people in it, so happy to be a part of that conversation. Typically, what we do is just go around the room with some quick introductions. Lots of familiar faces, so I expect that should be pretty quick. We're going to go through a quick lightning talk from Nick Santamaria on Skipper, which is a pretty fantastic looking product that they've put together. Very interested to see and learn more about it. We're going to open it up to discussion shortly after that. Basically any success stories, war stories, things people would like or typically have on their mind. Out of that, we'll fall into talking about some of the action items that we had from the last conversation, which I think was pretty good. And then kind of see if anybody's interested in maybe volunteering to present at an upcoming meetup. So let's go ahead and dive right in. I'm Kevin Bridges. I'm the CTO and founder of a company called DDEV. We make local development tools and are very interested in the Docker and Kubernetes space specifically. And I think let's go with let's get you last, Nick Santamaria, and let's move on to Tom.
Yeah, g'day Kevin. Yeah, Tom Toogood. I'm a platform engineer at Amazee.io, and yeah, been part of this group. And thanks guys for supporting it and everything. Just unfortunately, there were schedule conflicts with our usual CAD thing. Lucky I got out of that one today. So yeah, I'll pass over to Ben, who's a colleague of mine.
Cool.
Yeah, yeah, I'm Ben. I'm a system engineer at Amazee.io, working with Tom on our platform as well.
Awesome. And Nick Shu, I believe you are next.
Hey everybody. Yeah, Nick Shu, ops lead at Previous Next. Yeah, just doing Kubernetes and Go all the time, deploying Drupal. Yeah.
Nice.
And I work with Nick Santamaria. So.
And Ellie, I believe you're up next.
Hey there, I'm Ellie. I do some marketing, communications, documentation stuff for DDEV. So I'm here and I'm still slowly learning about Kubernetes.
Cool. And Nick, I believe you round out the group.
Cool. Yeah, so Nick Santamaria, work for Previous Next. Primarily work on our Skipper hosting platform, and yeah, really excited to show you some of the features and an overview of the product. So
cool. Yeah, go ahead and dive right in if you're up for it.
All right, can I share my screen? Just try that. All right, have you got my screen?
We do.
All right, excellent. So yeah, as mentioned before, I'm just going to give a brief overview of this new hosting product we've recently launched called Skipper. So it's our managed cloud hosting platform built with Kubernetes and AWS. So we've been running Kubernetes in production for about 4 years now, and Skipper is the culmination of all our learnings over that time. So we had a few design goals in mind. The first was for the tool to just get out of the way of our developers. You know, we don't want to force them to use clunky user interfaces or esoteric tools like kubectl or Helm, anything like that. We wanted everything to be automatable. And so to that end, we just have gone all in on a command line workflow. We also wanted to minimize operational hazards. So we're a very small team, and we don't want to spend all of our resources battling with outages or trying to configure finicky tools like Galera or GlusterFS. So this is one of the main reasons that we're on AWS, and we heavily leverage the managed services they provide to, you know, make sure that all the components in our stack are highly available. So the CLI is a simplified interface for the system. So what developers see is just the tip of the iceberg, but under the surface is a fairly complex system provisioned by KubeBuilder controllers. This is an overview of the stack. So at the edge, we're using CloudFront and Amazon Certificate Manager and Amazon's WAF service. Our Drupal stack runs nginx and PHP FPM, which are independently scalable. So each project has its own namespace, and each environment is then its own set of deployments, config maps, volumes within that Kubernetes namespace. The backend services are mostly AWS managed services. So we're using Aurora for our database, EFS for our shared file systems, SES for outbound mail, and we have the option to use other AWS services if the project requires it, like S3 or KMS. So to make the nginx FPM architecture work, we need to bake multiple images with identical copies of the source code in it. So we've done this with the skipper package command. This command orchestrates the front-end, back-end compiling steps and copies the compiled artifact into all the images that need to be deployed on the cluster. Once the images are baked, they're then pushed to the ECR registry. So I've got a quick demo of what that might look like too. So parts of this are sped up, but basically saying package with version 0.1.2. First step is creating a layer with all of the composer dependencies. Once that's completed, it'll jump onto all the front end. It then copies those two layers into a single image, and then the next, like the nginx, the FPM, and the CLI image all copy the artifact into their own images before it gets pushed up. So yeah, we really like this workflow rather than having to rely on developers to implement their own multi-stage Docker builds or something like that. All right, so once the images are built and pushed, they're deployed to an environment with a single command. So skipper deploy updates the environment object on the cluster, and then these changes cascade into lower level CRDs and end up creating Kubernetes and AWS resources, which are all wired to the app with a config map.
Sounds like you've got a pretty good supporter in the background there. He's cheering you on.
That's it. Hey, Dennis. Shh. He's really, yeah, he loves Kubernetes.
Nice.
Yeah, so this skipper deploy does a lot under the hood. This is a workflow diagram of how all of our CRDs fit together. So the details of this aren't particularly important, but as you can see, like up here is where your developers touching the CLI, and then it just explodes into tens of controllers down here, which result in Kubernetes objects and AWS objects being created. All right, so the so next up is configuring the app. So the skipper config command allows us to keep configuration out of the Git repo. It also allows us to, avoid sensitive credentials being exposed through the skipper UI. So we have a -- secret flag, which marks it as a secret. And as you can see in this output here, that it actually obfuscates it from the user interface. So monitoring is the next big pillar of the product. So we do have some of this exposed in the command line with the logs, but some of the cooler stuff is in the AWS interface in the console there. So we like collate everything into CloudWatch. So that's metrics, it's logs, and it really is a very powerful tool. So exposing these through dashboards, you know, we can give developers some pretty compelling information just right at their fingertips. So, you know, latest errors, you know, just a stream of log messages coming through. We can even do pretty gnarly stuff with the CloudWatch Insights query language. So this is an example of taking the CloudFront logs. So we ingest those in and parsing out each of the component parts of the log message, and then finding, you know, say, for example, the top 5 slowest pages on the site. So that's super neat. Another thing we can do, we see on the right-hand side is, you know, seeing who the most active clients are. So, you know, that one has been invaluable for projects where we've had, you know, a scraper or something trying to harvest data off the site, and we can just easily identify the offender and put them into the WAF block list. Yeah, so that's it. Oh, was there anything else I wanted to show? Oh, there was. So yeah, there's one other feature I thought was a pretty neat thing to show off, which is our the way that we've implemented giving developers SSH access to the environments. So rather than having them, you know, so common options are opening up like a SSH port and allowing people to just get straight into a running pod. Another one might be having like exec capability. So giving, you know, like with kubectl, you can do an exec into the pod. What we've done is a nice system where we actually, on a shell session initialization, we actually create a new pod and set the user up in that. This pod isn't like connected up to the ingress, so there's no requests coming in. So they are free to do whatever they like in there. You know, they can really do some heavy CPU intensive work without impacting on the production site. So I'll show you how that looks. So for a dev, they're going to run skip a shell prod. And yeah, we've got read-only file systems enabled. So, you know, they try and, you know, override index.php, they're going to have a hard time. And on the cluster, that looks like this. So I've just got a watch here for any pods with the name exec. And so when skip a shell is run, we'll see a new pod open up here. Any second, there we go. You know, the person has the shell, they try and run that, you know, overwrite the index.php file, see that they can't do anything, so they exit and the pod is cleaned up. Yeah, so that's a pretty neat little security feature. Another neat feature that we're quite proud of is our automated database images that are packaged nightly for developers. So we, from the backups that are taken each night, a Docker image is built which developers can pull to their local environment. And so this will have, you know, tables truncated, certain values sanitized, and this just means that you don't have to worry about doing, you know, drush SQL dump and pulling them down to your local environment. And it's been super convenient for our developers. They've all like been extremely receptive to this, and it's made our lives easier because we don't have developers inadvertently taking down the production site because they've just dumped like a huge database. We don't have to worry about the security implications of people, you know, having to go onto shell into prod all the time. So yeah, it's a super super good feature. I think I'll wrap up there. So if anyone's got any questions, please feel free to shoot.
I think it's a pretty efficient approach, allowing people to build the containers out locally. And I'm sure that helps with a lot of your overhead and processing times when it comes to, and discrepancy between essentially local and live, so that they have the ability to go through, build out their own containers and push those up. It's a pretty nice approach.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, like so far we've been very pleased with just like everything, you know, the performance of the platform, the developers' experience on it, our operational experience. You know, we've had very few teething issues since we've, you know, launched this version of it. And yeah, so far so good.
My biggest questions, I guess, would come around the use of kubectl to exec in. I imagine you went through a whole security review to consider that. And can you talk about the strengths of your approach from a security perspective?
Yes. So just to be get in the weeds a little bit. So we're running EKS as our managed kube cluster. And so EKS, all the authentication is based on, you know, Amazon's IAM policies and roles there.
Right.
So what that allows us to do is, you know, so really the authentication from our perspective is giving a set of IAM credentials to an end user, and that limits them to specific namespaces, and within those namespaces, specific RBAC permissions. So you can get quite fine-grained with that in terms of, you know, what you can list and what you can get and what you can exec into and things like that. And it's been so far, like we've taken a, you know, policy of like least privilege, which is, you know, like a little bit of a painful way to get started, you know, in terms of always hitting, you know, access denied issues when you're doing the initial development, but it does mean that you're really only giving your roles exactly the permissions that they need.
Cool.
And I think the other side, sorry, Nikshu, the other side to the security on it for doing a kubectl exec versus this SSH spin up approach is that developers, especially on the CLI, require a set of tools, like a whole slew of tools, whereas your FPM container just needs code and PHP FPM to run. It needs a much lower set of packages and things installed on there. So so the idea is we have that like FPM and the CLI container, and the skipper SSH mechanism then allows you to spin up that CLI container versus shelling into an existing webhead that has a whole bunch of software installed on there that's not actually required. And also contention for resources. So like, I'm not sure if anybody has any stories in the past, but I definitely do, where jumping on like a webhead instance and running drush or running some big command, and that's sharing resources with your web instances who are serving your clients. There's quite a bit of overlap there as well. So yeah, so that's kind of the other side of the security as well, being able to split up those packages as well as yeah, provide those isolated environments.
And yeah, and also like, you know, not necessarily related to that issue, but running the nginx PHP FPM architecture means that, you know, for example, you don't have to mount the private file system into your nginx container. So that's just, you know, one less thing that can potentially be exposed if someone does get access to the cluster or to that particular component.
Great. And as far as next steps, or I mean, you basically have a public forum here. So what would you like to see from the community to help support you, or maybe try out what you have? Anything that we can look at, or what are you thinking of doing next with the product, or where can we see you at shows?
Yeah, so I mean, it is a managed service, so we don't really have like a open source version at this point. I don't know if that's where we want to take it. Like it's still an early product, and obviously it's much easier to make decisions in with a small group of people than having a I guess like an open source community based approach to doing things. What would be interesting is, whether a community CRD definition could be landed on. So I know this is something that we've talked about in this group before. I am personally, I'm a little pessimistic on whether it's possible. Just the sheer amount of ways that you can skin the rabbit mean that there's just a huge amount of configuration options and things that will inevitably need to make their way into a CRD definition. So yeah, I would encourage people, if you are wanting to discuss you're building your own platform, or wanting to discuss any certain aspects of our tool, we're very happy to talk about how we've achieved it and what the pros and cons are. If anyone has any thoughts on ways that we could have done things that I've presented better, that would be great as well. I'd love to get some feedback.
Cool. Well, hopefully we'll get this out on the tweets and up on YouTube and get some additional traction for you, because it is an exciting project.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us.
Cool. One of the things that we've just stumbled across recently in that generic CRD conversation is that it might actually make more sense to have a generic set of Go-based libraries that specific CRDs can implement. So essentially, a lot of the functionality tends to be relatively similar, but there are instances where you need to do additional configuration. And we've landed on a pattern where using those libraries it can be used to quickly accelerate the development of CRDs, as well as useful in local development environments. So that actually brings up kind of one of the topics that we're talking about a little bit today, which is going to be a review of some of the proposals that happened in last week's session to kind of unify that effort to start working on a CRD or set of CRDs or a set of approaches to the different CMSs that are out there, genericize it a little bit more than just Drupal specific or WordPress specific or whatever. And that's coming up soon. So yeah, let's turn it over to the group. Basically, anything that you'd like to share with us, any challenges that you've had recently, any celebrations that you'd like to announce, or anything interesting in the Cube space that you're keeping your eye on?
I'm happy to just give a quick update on the Lagoon side of things. Yeah, we've been just the last few weeks been really pushing to get a native Kubernetes support for Lagoon. We're very close, and we've actually onboarded a customer last week. So there's been a lot of work over the last few months to make it happen. Most likely going to be coming out in the 1.4 release, where we've actually just got almost a like-for-like functionality with the similar OpenShift system. So that will sort of give us some feature parity. But we are pushing forward to look at sort of a Lagoon 2.0, which will be more of a native support for a whole lot of sort of managed services. And the idea really being that we have most of those functionality, all those managed services built into the platform, but we can sort of plug in and leverage any managed services of the provider we're going towards. But yeah, there's a lot of work going on, and hopefully we'll have some updates and potentially a demo coming up soon, Kevin. So yeah, keep that in mind.
I think you might be psychic, because that was exactly my next question.
Yeah, so that's something that I'd be really excited to do and present once we're in that sort of stable world, and invite people to come and check it out as well.
Cool. Well, that's an exciting development. It sounds like a pretty large project to move that rapidly. So congratulations for sure.
Yeah, thanks.
Quick
Thanks a lot
question:
for
is there looking to be an upgrade path from OpenShift to Vanilla Kube?
We're building potentially a migration process rather than really an upgrade path, just to ease the migration from OpenShift. So
Yeah, sure, that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, at this stage on the 1 series, essentially you like for like your project compatibility with native Kube and OpenShift will be identical. So there won't be anything changing from a project point of view. But yeah, so we're working on that migration. There might be likely API change and things happening in the 2.0 release.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, and thanks a lot for your talk, Nick. That's really awesome. Yeah, what we're working towards is trying to get to this native Kubernetes support, so we can also sort of start collaborating a lot more with this community as well.
If you don't call your migration tool Shift, Tom, then I think it's a real lost opportunity.
Yeah, we've got to come up with some pretty good ideas there, I think. Yeah, I think the OpenShift is still stuck. They haven't actually got a proper upgrade path from 3 to 4 yet. So, yeah.
Oh wow, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. There are a lot of changes in that release.
Excellent.
Yeah.
How about anybody else? Any more celebrations or announcements? All right. Let me share this screen real quick just to give a quick recap of what was discussed in the last meeting that we had. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep, got it.
So last meetup, we had a presentation from a gentleman named Sean. Sean walked us through kind of some ideas to unify this SIG a little bit more in line with the generic nature of most of the core Kubernetes SIGs and how they function. And out of that, he had some very specific recommendations for the group. So I want to put those out there if anybody's interested in taking a look at it. It's on GitHub at Dread SIG CMS. It's issue number 6. Some of the action items that he proposed for the group are that we begin by defining, a general mission statement, since we don't have one posted yet. He gave an example to work with open source CMS projects to enable their users to rapidly and easily deploy their projects on Kubernetes. He's basically recommending an approach where, maybe the group targets the top 3 to 5 CMSs that are out there that would transition to Kubernetes, and kind of come up with a set of documentation and guidelines on, well, if you're going to run, WordPress on a Kubernetes platform, these are the things that you might want to be aware of, and kind of the ethos of what we originally talked about with the group, but not so specific to a single CMS. He's got many ideas in here, so definitely encourage people to take a look at it. And if you have a few minutes and want to watch his overview of it and him digging into the points, the YouTube link is on that issue as well. So just want to throw that out there for people. And short of that, I think that we're down to just a few announcements. It looks like we have an opening on February 26th, if anybody is interested in presenting. I believe Florian might move into that slot, but it's still open if anybody wants to claim it. We're considering moving this to a monthly meeting instead of every 2 weeks, so that we can basically get a little bit more content heavy. Because it seems that we're a little thin as things are still starting to take off. But yeah, outside of that, I think we've reached the conclusion of this meeting. So Thank you all very much. Thank you very much, Nick. I'm very excited by what you showed us today. I definitely think that you're onto a good thing, and I wish you the best.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, anytime. All right. Well, I thank everybody for their time, and I will talk to you later. See you on the next meeting.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
See ya.
Everybody.
Bye.